Right, so today we're testing the Radeon RX 580 in Warzone 2. We are pairing this GPU with a 12400F Intel CPU, which is a 6-core 12-thread CPU, and we've also got 16 gigabytes of DDR4 through to 100 MHz CL16 memory. So we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. At the moment, we are at 1080p, and we are testing the minimum preset when we get to the quality presets. Just note that the render resolution is actually set to 50% when you enable the minimum preset. That will go to 100 as soon as you select any of the other presets, but for now we'll start with the minimum. Just one other thing to note is that on the minimum preset you can see that the shadows here, especially on the shoulders and the collarbone, it just looks atrocious. Alright, but here we go. As you can see from the top down, it's extremely difficult to spot any enemies, and that's because we're running at a 50% render resolution. Quite a few enemies actually dropped below me, and they disappeared from view not long after they actually passed me by, so that makes it a little bit more difficult to spot enemies in the distance. Right, but we are here in the Sawa village on this broken down ship, and we are going to try and make this as short as possible. Benchmarking battle royale games is actually very, very difficult. I keep on dying, so I can't complete my benchmark runs. It's mostly because I suck, but also because I concentrate on the performance more than actually the performance of my gameplay. Right, but here you can see that on the ship here we are getting about 120 frames per second. It's quite up and down. We get anywhere between 100 and 160 frames per second. So I just want to show you, if you actually look out over the water here, it drops quite a lot. You can see that we're getting about 100 frames per second, but if we look at this direction, we are getting about 135 frames per second. Right, so what my benchmark run will consist of is I'll be running to the front of the ship. Once again, I don't know what it's called, and then we'll be running back again, and we'll adjust the graphical settings and rinse repeat. One thing about this preset is that shadows look terrible. Not sure there's anything you can do about it if you play on this preset. I've tried disabling screen space reflections and shadows, etc. It just doesn't seem to be making any difference here. Alright, but we've run back and forth, and you can see that we averaged 126 frames per second. Our GPU usage, you can see that it does drop a little bit. Not sure what's that about. We don't see the frame rate drop when the GPU usage drops, but it drops from 100% to about 45%, and then it goes back up again. This CPU is definitely more than capable of keeping this RX 580 saturated, even at 50% render resolution. As you can see, most of the time it's sitting at 100%. Just every now and again it does drop, and there's a little bit of a stutter. Alright, so that's it for the basic preset. I'm going to just hide, and then we'll up the quality preset. Alright, so the basic preset moves the render resolution back to 100%. And as you can see, let's just reset our numbers here. Our frame rate pretty much almost halved, but that's expected because we were running at half the resolution. And now the game is definitely a lot more clear. It's definitely a lot more crisp and sharp, and we can actually see what's happening around us. Not that that'll help us because our frame rate is quite low. You can see that it's dipping below 60 frames per second every now and again, especially if you look out over the water, and that's definitely not ideal. I mean, once we move a little bit more inland, the frame rate does increase. Water is quite intensive in this game, but I wanted to select this spot to show you the worst case scenario. Alright, so we completed our circuit of the ship, and you can see that we got an average of 75 frames per second, a 1% low of 38, or 37, 38 again, and the 0.1% lows are sitting at 31 frames per second. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what the 1% and 0.1% low numbers mean, the 1% low number means that you should be getting that number or higher 99% of the time, and the 1% and the 0.1% lows mean that you will get that number or higher 99.9% of the time. You can see that the frame time graph is not as smooth as we'd like it to be. It goes up and down. It looks like a heartbeat, and that would indicate micro stutters, and that's also definitely not ideal. You can see that the frame time pacing is also a little bit inconsistent. It goes from 11 milliseconds, goes all the way up to 16 milliseconds at time, and that's something that you don't want. All right, let's see what happens if we up the preset. All right, we are now on the balanced preset, and I'm just going to reset our numbers here. We did drop a few frames, about 10 frames per second. There seems to be quite a lot of action around me. It doesn't seem like the fidelity actually increased that much. I mean, just look at the shadows here. This just not sure if it's just glitching out. The water is also very grainy. Let's just make sure that film grain etc. did not turn on. All right, so depth of field and film grain, everything is still off, and there are enemies close to me. I don't have any FSR enabled, so I mean the balanced preset just looks terrible. I would not play on the balanced preset, but nevertheless we need to just reset our numbers here, and we need to complete our benchmark run. There was a sound of a window breaking. Not sure if it was below me or actually in this ship. Let's hope it was not in this ship, otherwise this benchmark run might not be completed. You can just see the objects in the distance are shimmering. The shadows and the oil, everything, it just looks terrible. I noticed this, that the basic preset looks a lot better than the balanced preset. It's probably got to do with the screen space reflections and screen space shadows. That's just not working well together. All right, but there we have it for the balanced preset. We got an average of 71 frames per second. Our 1% lows were sitting at 37 and our 0.1% lows at 33. Not really sure if we should be trying the ultra preset, but hey, we are benchmarking GPUs, so we have to try. Right, let's just reset our numbers here. Now you can have a look at the frame time graph there. It's very inconsistent. It's all over the place. 4 millisecond going to 20 milliseconds, and that just provides a less than smooth or ideal gameplay experience. Right, but we are, well, almost still hitting 60 frames per second. We are dipping below that. You can see our average is sitting at 57 frames per second. Definitely not what you want when you are playing an online competitive shooter like Warzone 2. Alright, and now we are back in hiding, and that was it for the Ultra preset. We've got an average of 56 frames per second, 1% lows of 22, and a 0.1% low of 14. Alright, now we're going to try the Extreme preset, and we'll just reset our numbers here again. But you can see, even with the previous preset setting, the shadows and the ambient occlusion looked a little bit better. There's still some artifacting happening when you, especially if you are looking at the water through grates or even railings. It's less than ideal. I actually did not notice this on any of the other GPUs that I've tested, so not sure if it's a driver issue. We are running the latest Adrenaline driver for this GPU, so it shouldn't be a driver issue. Not entirely sure what the cause of that is, but once again, that's definitely less than ideal. And you can see that our performance is quite a lot worse with the Extreme preset. I mean, that was to be expected, but just looking at the 1%, the 0.1% lows, that's going to hold you back in a very intense gunfight. All right, that was it for our 1080p results, but we just want to test FSR as well. So we are going to go with the basic preset, and we are going to use AMD FSR 1.0. Unfortunately, this game only supports FSR 1.0, not FSR 2, but let's see how it goes. All right, let's just reset our numbers here, and strangely enough, we're not really seeing a big performance increase. Not sure what's happening here. This is pretty much the same performance as what we saw when we had the basic preset enabled. It might be a little bit higher, but definitely not what I was expecting. Let's just make sure that our FSR settings are correct. FSR is on ultra quality. Let's just put it on quality and let's see. And somebody's shooting at me. Let me just get away here. So, and reset our numbers because we were in the menu. And so it seems that quality did increase our frame rate. Ultra quality did not really. I mean, that would make sense because ultra quality renders at a higher internal resolution than quality. I think quality would render at 720p and then upscales to 1080p. So we are still far from a very high refresh rate experience. I would say that 120 frames per second on average would be ideal for an online competitive shooter. So let's just see if we go back to our minimum preset, just set the resolution to 100% and test with FSR if we can get 120 frames per second. Right, so we're back on the minimum preset here. We are just going to select 100% render resolution. Let's just apply that and then enable FSR. Alright, and that's not what I wanted to have happened here. At least in the gulag, we are getting 150 frames per second. Let's just reset our numbers here. This is actually pretty good, but then again, this is a very small area, so it's definitely not as intensive to render. We might actually even survive this gulag without having to fight because I don't think there are many players left. Just my luck. We are here with shotguns and there were enough players. I'm just going to go right, see if we can kill this guy. Alright, we managed to kill one guy. Let's just hope we can get the other guy as well, because I really want to complete this benchmark run. And there he is. And there we go. So we can actually redeploy. Unfortunately, we can't go back to our Sawa village, however you pronounce that, because now it's the gas is closing in. So we'll just go a little bit closer to the circle, but still more or less in the same area. Alright, this area is actually a little bit more intensive as well, just because of the surrounding water. But as you can see, we are getting about 100 frames per second. I know I said 120 frames per second would be ideal, but I think I can live with 100 frames per second in this game. But that's just the wrong button. I'm used to pressing E to pick up stuff, play a little bit of Fortnite, but I mean, that's just my excuse. Inside, we are getting 120 frames per second, so that's pretty good. And I think if you have to play this game on an RX 580, then you should probably be playing at the minimum preset with the render resolution set to 100% and then enable FSR. It's still a very grainy, not very detailed, very pixelated. That's the correct word, pixelated, and it might make it a little bit more difficult for you to spot enemies. So I actually take that back. I think you should play on the basic preset without FSR, as that gives you the better visual quality, but a lower frame rate, and you might be able to spot enemies a little bit better. Alright, so we are going to go to 1440p, and we're going to restart the match. Alright, once again we are here on this stranded ship, and we are now at 1440p, and we've switched back to the minimum preset. So once again the game is running at 50% render resolution. We are getting about 100 frames per second, but I would advise against playing with the render resolution at anything below 100%. Rather use upscaling technologies like Intel XeSS or DLSS or FSR if you've got an AMD card. Right, so looking out over the water here, we're getting about 80 frames per second, and then looking out over the ship, we are getting 120 frames per second. But the frame time graph, once again, if you look at the bottom left there, well, in the top left hand corner at the bottom, you'll see that the frame time graph is pretty inconsistent, and that was quite a big stutter over there. So this one I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter because I don't think 1440p would be the best resolution to play at with this GPU, and also we've got gas incoming. But we've just completed our normal run from the back of the ship to the front, or from the front of the ship to the back. I'm not sure which way this ship is facing. I think that's the front. Anyway, so we are getting about 106 frames per second average, 52 frames per second for the 1% lows, and the 0.1% lows are sitting at 38. All right, but this is once again at 50% resolution scale. So let's see what happens on the basic preset. All right, we're now on the basic preset, still at 2560 by 1440, and render resolution is now set to 100. All right, let's just reset our numbers here, and immediately the game looks a lot better, but it plays a lot worse. All right, just once again, look at the frame time graph there. Those stutters are really annoying, and it will affect your gameplay. And even though the game looks quite good, I don't think these exact settings would be ideal. I mean, at minimum you'd want 60 frames per second constant. As mentioned earlier, I'd prefer 120 frames per second or more, seeing that it's a competitive shooter. So getting below 60 frames per second is just not worth it. Right, so if we have a look out over the water once again, we are getting 30 frames per second. It's going to definitely affect your gameplay, especially if you are moving around. Certain areas are underwater, certain areas are inland, and if you are on land and getting 60 frames per second, and all of a sudden you have to aim at the water and you get 30 frames per second, that will significantly affect your aiming. Right, but we've got an average of 53 frames per second, 1% lows of 27, and 0.1% lows of 18. But the stuttering on this preset is definitely a little bit experience ruining. All right, and we are back on this ship again, and now we are at 1440p with the Ultra preset. Let's just make sure everything is still okay. So we're on the Ultra preset and 100% render resolution, no upscaling. Right, and as you can see, we are getting 30 frames per second. The input latency is terrible, and the stuttering, like, that's just it's increased quite a bit. You can have a look at the frame time graph there. So looking out over the water, we are getting 27 frames per second. Looking out over this way, we are getting 37 frames per second. So now the delta is not as big. Percentage wise, it's also not as big as previously, but definitely this is not playable at these settings. Once again, I'm just going to make this a quick one, because you shouldn't be playing at these settings with this card, and also because the gas is incoming once again. I had to restart our benchmark after just the previous run, because I died. I did not die because I got shot. I died because I did not keep my eyes on the gas. All right, and the gas is incoming again, so we've got a few minutes. So we are getting an average of 37 frames per second, and 1% and 0.1% lows are atrocious. They are sitting at 15 and 11 frames per second respectively, and definitely not what I would recommend. Right, so I'm not going to try the extreme preset. The ultra preset is already bringing this system to its knees. So let's see what happens if we enable FSR. All right, so we are on the basic preset, 100% render resolution, and FSR is set to quality. All right, let's just reset our numbers here. And you can see that we got an increase. Well, the frame rate more than doubled. That's actually pretty good. You can see some aliasing, especially in the railings here, but that's to be expected as we are now rendering at 1080p internal, and we are upscaling to 1440p, and the anti-aliasing is also set to a little bit of a lower quality. Right, I'm just going to make a little bit of a run for it because the gas is incoming, and I messed up that parachute. I think we should be able to make it. We'll chat soon. So here you can see that once we are away from the water, we are getting quite a high average frame rate. We are getting about between 80 and 90 frames per second here. I've seen 100 every now and again, so that's definitely very nice, but as I said, it's very inconsistent, purely because at one point it'll be running at 90 frames per second, and you go over a hill or look at water and it drops down to 70 frames per second. I must say that I'm not entirely happy with the FSR implementation of this game, seeing that it's FSR 1. It's still the old version of FSR. You can definitely see the aliasing and some artifacting in the distance, especially in trees, etc., that have a lot of fine detail. Like these wooden fences, they are shimmering quite a bit. You'd not be able to spot enemies behind them, especially if you are moving, but I mean, it is what it is. At least there is FSR, and FSR is supported on almost all GPUs. I haven't seen a single GPU where it's not supported, so that's definitely a plus point. Alright, so we made it to the safe zone, and now we are going to try 4K. Alright, we are on the minimum preset at 4K, so once again at 50% render resolution, and we are getting 77 frames per second, which is pretty good. Let me just reset the numbers here. I mean, this is pretty much what we got at 1440p native, so I mean, it would make sense because once again we are rendering at 50% render resolution. Let's just see if we can actually get a kill, and we are definitely doing better at 4K than what we did at 1080p. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So maybe 4K is the resolution you should be playing on. I'm just trying to make it to safety, just to another safe zone, but we keep on running into enemies here. That one I messed up quite a bit, so I'm expecting to die. But let's just yeah. I mean, we did get one kill and then the grenade got me. So just for the sake of completing this benchmark, we are going to spectate this guy, Birman. I hope you don't mind. Anyway, this just shows you that it's extremely difficult to benchmark battle royale games or accurately benchmark them. So that was at the 4K minimum setting, and we'll try the 4K basic now. Alright, we are on the 4K basic preset, and we are not getting a constant 30 frames per second. Right now he's looking at a rock, so we are getting 30 frames per second, but moving around, I don't know, this guy seems to be a little bit of a camper. Not ideal for our benchmark run. But as you can see, moving around, there's quite a lot of stuttering. If you have a look at the frame time graph there, it looks like a heartbeat once again. Not a very healthy heartbeat, but as you can see, zooming in, he's dropping below 30 frames per second. So definitely 4K should not even be considered when you have an RX 580. But let's see what the Ultra preset looks like, and then we'll test FSR. Alright, it doesn't look like we dropped too much by going to the Ultra preset. Sure, we dropped between 5 and 8 frames per second, and percentage wise that's quite a lot, but you can see that we are dropping to below 20 frames per second even. I mean, if I hide my performance metrics there, you can see that our FPS counter in the top left hand corner actually shows us a red, which is not ideal. Right, so 17 frames per second with 1% or 0.1% load sitting at 9 frames per second. That's definitely not the way you want to play this game. So let's go back to 4K basic and test with FSR. Alright, we're on the basic preset and FSR 1 is enabled on the quality mode. Alright, let's just reset our numbers here. And now you can see we are getting about 40 frames per second. We don't have that big a drop when this person zooms in, but once again, below 60 frames per second, I'd consider completely unplayable for a game like this, and ideally you'd want even higher than that. Now, just to be clear, this is an RX 580 GPU. It's quite an old GPU. I'm not expecting any miracles. I was actually a little bit impressed with the 1080p performance on the basic preset. That's definitely where I would consider playing this game. You can try and enable AMD's sharpening. That might make things look a little bit better, but at 1080p I'd stay away from lowering the render resolution scale, as well as from enabling AMD FSR. Right, and that will be it for this video. I'm sorry I could not personally complete this benchmark run. I just could not survive long enough to complete the whole thing, but luckily Birman here helped us out, and the conclusion is do not play at 4K. Alright, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.